Okay, started.
Okay, so today we're going to go over linear equations. So a quick review on variables. A variable is a letter or symbol that represents a value we don't know. And variables can be like any letter or any symbol, and they can represent almost basically anything in math. They can represent 4, 8.93, or 1/32. It depends on what equation. And to solve for a variable, we have to move the variable to one side of the equation and the numbers to the other side. So for example, the equation x minus 2 equals 6. Remember that we're trying to move the x to one side of the equation. So to solve, we first add 2 to both sides, and that would give us x equals 8, which, I mean, we've moved, and you can see that in doing this, by moving the variable to one side of the equation, we find the value of that variable. So that's what solving an equation is. And here is another example, which is a little bit more hard. 3x plus 6 equals 8x plus 1. And when it says to solve like an equation, it's talking about finding the value of the variable. So for this equation, remember, we're trying to put the variable on one side and everything else on the other side. So the first thing we could do is subtract 1 from both sides. And that would change the equation to 3x plus 5 equals 8x. And next, we subtract 3x from both sides, and we get 5 equals 5x. Finally, we divide both sides by 5, and that gives us x equals 1. So there are some basic steps to solving an equation, and ultimately the goal when you're solving an equation is to isolate the variable on one side and put all the other numbers on the other side. So the first step in solving an equation is to, Yolanda.
All right.
Okay, is to simplify each side of the equation by removing parentheses and combining like terms. And then we use addition or subtraction to isolate the variable term on one side of the equation. And then finally, we have to solve there for the variable using multiplication or division. So some basic rules for solving an equation. This is probably the most important rule. Anything you do to the left side of the equal sign, you have to do to the right side. And if you think about it, let's say you have this very simple equation that's just 2 plus 3 equals 1 plus 4, which is true because 2 plus 3 equals 5 and 1 plus 4 equals 5. And if you simplify it, 5 equals 5. So yes, that's an equation because both sides are equal. But let's say you do something like, let's say you add 2 to the left side, but you don't add 2 to the right side. Then if you simplify it, you'll find that the equation will end up saying 7 equals 5, which is not true at all. So this is why whatever you do to the left side, you have to do to the right side when solving an equation. So the second rule is, if possible, you have to get rid of any variables in the denominator. So for example, if you have an equation 2 over x equals 1, in this state, you can't really solve it. So in order to solve it, we have to multiply both sides by x, which cancels out the x in the denominator on the left side. And that just gives us 2 equals 1x, or just x equals 2. And this is important, especially when you have like more convoluted equations, because sometimes they can look a little confusing. And a tip is that sometimes variables can look a little daunting. And especially if there's like a bunch of them in like one equation, sometimes may be hard to figure out where to start. Just in that case, just remember that a variable is just a number in disguise. Variables should be treated like normal numbers because that's what we are. That's what they are, and we're just trying to solve for them. So first example, solve 4x minus 15 equals 5 for x.
And so if you're watching the recording, you should just pause here and try to solve it on your own. But we'll move on to show you the answer and the explanation now.
So the answer for this would be 5. So remember, we're trying to isolate x on one side of the equation. So to do that, we're first going to add 15 to both sides. What that does is first, it cancels out the 15 on the left side, and it adds 15 to the right side, which gives us 4x equals 20. And then we divide both sides, not just one, both sides, by 4 to get x equals 5. And that's the answer. So this second problem. Solve this big equation. 1 over x plus 1 over 2x equals x over 2x plus 2. And if you're watching, pause and see if you can solve it. And a hint. So first, what you probably should do is look at the x over 2x term and try to cancel out those x's. And then once you've done that, and if you're still stuck, second hint is to try to add the fractions on the left side.
Okay, now I will show the answer and the explanation.
So the answer for this would be 3/5. And so here's the explanation. Here's the original equation. The first step I would take is look at the x over 2x term. We need to try to cancel out those x's. So once you cancel them out, we simplify the term to 1/2. And once we do that, we can see that both of these are numbers which we can add to get 5 over 2. And now we want to try to add the fractions on the left side by combining them. And in order to add fractions with different denominators, we have to make the denominators the same. So we multiply the 1 over x term by 2 over 2. And that gives us 2 over 2x. Yolanda.
Oh, sorry.
That gives us 2 over 2x plus 1 over 2x equals 5 over 2. And then we add those to get 3 over 2x equals 5 over 2. And next, remember that we have to get rid of the variable in the denominator by multiplying both sides by x. And that gives us 3 over 2 equals 5 over 2 times x. And finally, the 2's in the denominator cancel, and because we can multiply both sides by 2 and they disappear. And then that gives us 3 equals 5x. Divide both sides by x and we get our answer. X equals 3/5. Okay, so for a quick coordinate grid review. On a coordinate plane, the y-axis is vertical and the x-axis is horizontal. And points on a plane can be represented with coordinates, which, Yolanda?
Oh.
So which can be represented by how far they are along the x-axis and how far they are along the y-axis. So for example, point A, it would have the coordinate 2, 3 because it is 2 units down the x-axis and 3 units up the right or the y-axis. And in coordinates, the x coordinate will come before the y coordinate. So for example, 2, which defines how far A is along the x-axis, would come first, and then 3.
All right, so here you should again pause and try to write on your own what point B and C are, and make sure you format it correctly with the parentheses, the x coordinate, comma, y coordinate, and then closing parentheses. Okay, and we are going to move on.
Okay, so the slope of a line. The slope is basically how steep a line is. And to calculate it, you do rise over run, which means you choose 2 points on the line. It doesn't matter what 2 points. Then you subtract the y coordinates of the points. And then you subtract the x coordinates of the points. And then you divide them. So for example, in this line, we chose 2 points, and the difference in the y coordinates was 4, and the difference in the x coordinates was 2. So the slope would be 4 divided by 2, which equals 2. And the slope of a line is represented in a linear equation by the letter m. And a linear equation is just a way to represent a line using an equation instead of on a graph.
Okay, so here is example problem. Dang it. Okay, well, you see the answer already, that's okay. So the question is to find the slope of this line. You should try to work this out on your own, even though I already showed the answer by accident. So pause here and remember, slope is rise over run. So what you should do is identify 2 points that are that have like both integers for the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate, so that's easy to calculate. Then find the difference between the y-coordinates and put that as your numerator, and find the difference of the x-coordinates and put that as your denominator. So pause here and work that out on your own, and then I will move on to explaining the answer. So the slope of this line is -1/2. And so what you should do, first you should pick 2 points. They can be any 2 points, but here we're going to pick 0, 4, and we are going to pick 2, 3. And so first we take the y-coordinates, which would be 4 and 3. And so the line goes down 1 point, 1 space on the y-axis between 4 and 3. And then you take the x-coordinates, 0 and 2, and it goes over 2. So that means your fraction is -1/2, which gives you -1/2. And now you don't have to do it in that order. You can also take the point 2, 3 and then go to 0, 4, and that will give you the same slope. Or you can even take different points like 4, 0 and 2, 3. The slope of the line just remains constant because it's a line and it'll always have the same slope. Oh, and also, rise over run is an easy way to remember how to find slope, because rise refers to y and run refers to x. And now here's the format of a linear equation, which is basically how a line is represented. So m is the slope of the line, and b equals the y-intercept. Okay, so we'll go back to this line over here. And you can see the y-intercept is where the line intersects the y-axis. So here, that would be the point 0, 4, which is right here. That is the y-intercept. So then the equation of that line on the previous slide would be y equals -1/2 x plus 4, because the y-intercept was at 0, 4. And yep. A useful resource is desmos.com, desmos.com, which lets you graph any equation, and that will help you whenever you're learning linear equations and things like that. So we're going to move on to parallel and perpendicular lines. Two lines are parallel if they have the same slope. And if they're parallel, that means they will never intersect no matter how far they go. And remember, slope is m, so a line will be the same if it has this. A line will be parallel if it has the same slope. And so here's where you should pause and name a line that is parallel to y equals -3x plus 4. So you want it to have the same slope. So that means that any line that's y equals -3x plus anything. Anything can be the y-intercept. So for example, y equals -3x plus 5, y equals -3x minus 2. That would all work. Those lines are all parallel to that line. And now here's how to find lines that are perpendicular. Perpendicular means that they meet at 90-degree angles. And as for the slope of those lines, they would be opposite reciprocals. In an opposite reciprocal, that means that you divide -1 by that number. So for example here, -1 divided by -2 equals 1/2. Or another way to think about it is to first find the opposite of -2, which is 2, and then you find the reciprocal, so 1 divided by 2, and that gives you 1/2. So here you should find a line that is perpendicular to y equals 2/3 x minus 9. And if you need a hint, I will tell you that the opposite reciprocal of 2/3 is -3/2. Okay, now there are basically an infinite amount of answers that would be right, but one example is y equals -3/2 x plus 3. And okay, also here is what a parallel line would look like. As you can see here, these lines have the same slope, a slope of 4, and they're parallel, so they will never touch or intersect. And here are some perpendicular lines. So here is y equals -2x plus 4. Here is y equals 1/2 x plus 12. And you can see that they meet at right angles. And the slope, -2, is the opposite reciprocal of 1/2. Okay, so now we'll pretend like you never saw those answers and go to here. Try out this problem. Line xy is parallel to y equals 3x minus 2 and runs to the point 3, 4. Find the y-intercept of line xy. So your first step should be finding the slope of line xy. And it tells you that it's parallel to y equals 3x minus 2. So what is the slope? Try and figure that out on your own. Okay, so the slope of line xy is 3. And so that means that what we know so far about line xy is that its equation is y equals 3x plus an unknown b. And that's the y-intercept, which is also what we're trying to find out. So to find the y-intercept, we need to somehow use the other bit of information they gave us, which is that it runs through the point 3, 4. So you can pause and think about this on your own, how you would use that point. Or you can continue and I will explain. So you want to plug in the y-coordinate, which is 4, for y in the equation of line xy. And then you plug in 3 for the x in line xy. So then if I can annotate, I will annotate to help you understand this. Okay, that works. So the equation of line xy so far, what we know is that y equals 3x plus b. And so you want to plug in this point here. So you plug in 4 where y is. 4 equals 3, and then you plug in 3 where x is. So this would be times 3 plus b. And then this is basically a one variable equation like we talked about at the beginning of this lesson. So now you have 4 equals 9 plus b. And now you should know what b is, because if you subtract 9 from both sides, then that will tell you that b equals -5. And that's also the answer to this problem. The y-intercept of that line is -5.